Well, greetings, everybody. It's exciting to present this seminar on can we make peace between faith and reason, a vital topic today, and probably on my part, 30 or more years in the making. I'm Dr. Gordon Karkner, a meta-educator with UBC postgraduate students, author of Mapping the Future, The Great Escape from Nihilism, and also The 10 Myths About Christianity with Michael Green. My blog is ubcgcu.org, where you can find some of our lectures as well as various discussions on various topics along this line. And this is also our lecture forum, ubcgfcf.com. We'll talk a little bit more about that during the seminar. And if you would like, if you're really keen, you want to download my PhD dissertation. This is what it's called, A Critical Examination of Michel Foucault's Concept of Moral Self-Constitution in Dialogue with Charles Taylor. That would be on either of these blogs, these websites. So thanks for joining us, and I hope you really enjoy the seminar. I think we're covering some issues that are pertinent to today's world, to a lot of confusion, and we hopefully will make some progress in looking at things in a fresh way. Hopefully you see a fresh perspective as a result of this seminar. So we want to make peace. This is the dove of peace with especially the olive branch. So we're holding out an olive branch between faith and reason and faith. But there are several things that are blocking the path to such reconciliation, such renewed friendship or dialogue or interaction. Sometimes there's dialectic between faith and reason, but ultimately we want to move towards building bridges and reconciliation. But you can see, as with this tree, sometimes the bridge is blocked by debris of one sort or another in our thinking, oftentimes. So here are some of the prejudgments, or what you might call prejudices or assumptions, when one starts to think about faith and reason in today's culture in late modernity. And I'll list these. Modern reason has rendered ancient faith redundant, lacking credibility. They're at war. Modern reason is oriented to removing faith from the landscape. Secondly, faith is a superstitious, irrational assent to unfounded premises proceeding against good evidence. Third, reason requires nothing of faith to function well. There are no unproven assumptions required for science. Four, sound reason requires the worldview of atheism or philosophical naturalism, also called materialism. Five, reason is ideologically and morally neutral, factual, empirical, and deductive. Six, religion and science operate in non-overlapping magisteria or domains. So says Stephen Jay Gould, and they're really dealing in different kinds of causes, supernatural versus natural causes. And finally, faith is rooted in the emotions. Reason is grounded in cool logic. These are some of the things that are sacred cows in our day, and they're held very closely to the mind of many people. Often they are running in the background of our thinking, and we don't even realize they exist until we get into a discussion with someone or debate. The first part of this session is really looking in more depth into the definition, and I want to do some clarification of what faith is, what reason is, and hopefully we'll see things in a fresh light. So this is our forum, our regular monthly forum at UBC. It's called the UBC Graduate and Faculty Christian Forum. We've been running for about 30 years, and it is a serious academic interchange on faith and reason issues. And you can look up some of our talks there and see whether we're doing a good job on this. So you could follow up this seminar with looking at some of our lectures. So we start with the question of, can we have pure reason or pure faith? Fides et ratio, the Latin words for faith and reason. The contemporary tendency toward a pure reason or pure faith is quite impossible to actualize. There are no pure domains of reason or faith. They are intimately intertwined in any quest for knowledge and understanding, any quest for the truth of the matter. One cannot get rationalism, that is, reason alone rather than experience as the foundation of certainty, without the other extreme of fideism, that is, the belief that the exclusive reliance on faith alone plus a disparagement of reason. In this case, they look like enemies. Another harmful polarization occurs between Nietzsche and the positivists. So Nietzsche claimed that there are only interpretations, and this is where we get historicism, relativism, the individual idea of truth versus a large T truth, different narratives, etc. And the positivists claim that there are only verifiable facts, which has been strong in the West in the early 20th century particularly, but still holds strongly today. So can we find a better balance between these extremes? Can we build bridges? And I think it must be said that bridges must be built from both sides, both people of faith and people who see themselves as reasoning people, the university, professors, etc. They both have to build bridges. The quest for integration is a lifelong journey towards maturity of the mind and the heart. When we understand the nuances of this relationship, that is, faith seeks reason and reason assists faith, it is deeply freeing and enriching. The way we frame the dialogue is critical, and worldview language will greatly assist us here. Personal testimony, I have discovered so much in my search for insight into reality through biological and medical science, theology, history, psychology, and philosophy, both philosophy of science and philosophy of late modern culture. My education has covered the span of the pre-modern, modern, and postmodern cultural ecosystems. So this has really sparked a great deal of curiosity and I guess confidence in understanding where people are coming from. My faith has also been a vital part of this journey of discovery, and I think millennials should be inspired by the following vital discussion to help them sort through some of their conundrums, some of their confusions, and the inner conflicts that they face. So what we are confronting here is rationalism. We are deconstructing rationalism. Sadly, it seems to have to believe that faith is nothing but fideism for its proud identity. So worldviews are an important part of discernment in this particular relationship. Worldviews are the basic stuff of human existence, the lens through which the world is seen, the blueprint for how one should live in it, and above all, the sense of identity and place which enables human beings to be what they are. To ignore worldviews, either our own or those of the culture we are studying, would result in extraordinary shallowness. So says N.T. Wright in his book, New Testament and the People of God. So worldview framing of knowledge, identity, and faith assumption are all involved in this process of discussing the reconciliation of faith and reason. You'll see that operating in my discussion. So first of all, we want to appeal to Jens Zimmerman, a Regent College professor who discerns a robust modern humanism. He's recovering the language of humanism from ancient times to the present in some of his work. Especially this book, Incarnational Humanism, it's quite accessible to people today. He says this, understanding the nature of reason is central to our conception of human existence. We must resist a narrow conception of human rationality that excludes reason as irrational, because such a view cripples our ability to analyze correctly the current state of Western culture. As Rodney Stark has argued in his book, The Victory of God, Christianity's ability to combine faith and reason with a progressive view of human nature laid the foundation for Western science and technological progress. Building on Judaism, Christianity also allowed for concepts of human dignity, personhood, and individuality that have decisively shaped Western views of society. Neither the best nor the worst features of modernity are comprehensible without the transformative influence of Christianity on Greco-Roman culture. So I think he's sort of laying down the gauntlet here of rediscovering and rediscussing this relationship between faith and reason, not excluding religion from that discussion. So negotiating the new peace means committing ourselves to mutually enriching appreciation, interaction, and cooperation. We are saying that faith and reason have much to offer one another. We begin with a very strong intellectual from Duke University, D. Stephen Long. He has a key insight at this juncture in our discussion. And he shows that it's important to recover certain kinds of language and understanding of truth as we proceed. Stephen was part of our forum series a few years ago, and we really enjoyed his insights. He does not believe in the Great Divide. Neither does he sense that peace is achieved through an anti-intellectual retreat into a private and exclusive security of tribes by faith or reason. Here are a couple of quotes from him, prescient quotes. Faith not only seeks and presumes reason, it converts it. Every account of reason assumes something beyond it, some enabling condition that makes it possible, but cannot be accounted for within its own systematic aspirations. Likewise, faith can never be pure. It will always assume and use reason even as it transfigures it. And this is affirmed by physicist Paul Davies, the director of Beyond, the Center for Fundamental Concepts in Science, especially regarding scientific laws. He says, we cannot prove scientific laws by scientific method, but we cannot proceed if we do not seriously believe in them. This is the first run at this problem. Next, from Stephen Long, faith adds less material content to geology, physics, mathematics, evolutionary science, economics, than the form within which they can be properly understood, so that they are never closed off from the mystery that makes all creaturely being possible. So in this sense, faith offers the worldview framework of predictability, inspiration, and consistency for reason. We had a recent discussion in September of last year, of 2020, with top biochemists from the National Institute of Health in the US, Washington, D.C., Cy Gard, based on his book, The Work of His Hands, where he talks about how at first he was totally committed to science. He was very bullish on the scientific method and all that he could discover and offer. He published many, many papers and books on the subject of biochemistry, but eventually he realized that the faith infrastructure of science was also important. And over a long period of time, eventually around in his 60s, he became a person of faith as well as a person of science or reason. Also, added to this discussion of deconstruction of rationalism, we have the concept of critical realism. So this is where we begin to call out or confront the extreme skepticism of people like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, or Yuval Noah Harari, which ironically involves a kind of blind faith. Charles Taylor calls it a closed world system, a CWS, or a closed mind bias, one which rejects the possibility of the transcendent prior to investigation. And Oxford theoretical physicist Ard Louis notes that it is tempting for some of these popularizers of science to wrap themselves in the scientific flag in order to justify broad philosophical pontification, including the trashing of religion from the outset. This seriously harms the already broken relationship between faith and reason and prevents productive dialogue. On the other side of the equation is Ernin Mcmullen, a prominent philosopher of science from Cambridge University, now deceased. He is a realist who believes that our thinking, our models, and our senses apply to reality. He questions such radical skepticism. For him, God, quarks, electrons, and gluons, though unobservable directly, are considered real. This is the epistemological idea of critical realism. And part of that, a key part of that, is what he calls retroduction. This claims that we can trace back to a causal explanation from the effect that it has on the world, aka inference from effect to cause. This will become important as we proceed. Dr. Paul Allen at Corpus Christi College at UBC wrote about Ernin Mcmullen's view in his book and his PhD thesis, Ernin Mcmullen and Critical Realism in the Science Theology Dialogue. Now, another point that Paul Allen made in a recent talk at UBC in our forum was about Bernard Lonergan. Knowing is affirming what one correctly understands in one's own experience. I know myself, I know my body, I know my wife, things that are immediately present to me. Belief is accepting what we are told by others on whom we can reasonably rely. This is the received understanding upon which we build in any field of study. Belief is an exceptionally important part of the scientific enterprise. For instance, any scientist that begins a chemistry investigation does not have to prove the whole periodic table. That scientist assumes the periodic table in order to proceed. Nobody can do all the scientific experiments that precede him or her in order to proceed with their own investigation. Knowledge and belief are always interwoven as we perform well in science or other fields. I encourage you to look up this YouTube video, Critical Realism in Science and Religion, to see a bit of a discussion, including one with Paul Allen in the YouTube series, Closer to the Truth. That leads us to the question of the proper limits of science. We all know that science is a great tool to find consistency in our discoveries, our intuitions, and our hunches. But faith actually acts as an underlying rationality, and here's how that occurs. All human knowledge is seen as dependent on faith in the order of natural laws, as we saw with Paul Davies. Faith in our senses, in our reasoning capacity. It involves faith in our memory, our imagination, in the accounts of events we receive from others. This includes faith or trust in the respected tradition of our discipline, together with its unique methodology. But science is incapable of supplying answers in the realm of ethics, theology, and the purpose of life. While dealing with observable, measurable phenomena, modern science has nothing to say about compassion, beauty, self-centeredness, or cruelty. It intentionally limits its purview to secondary causes. Most of the important questions of human flourishing are not scientific questions at the end of the day, nor will they ever be, no matter how much science advances. G.K. Chesterton once wrote, "It's an act of faith to assert that our thoughts have any relation to reality at all." And following that, Oxford mathematician and philosopher John Lennox says he is just amazed in the way that mathematics fits natural reality. So on this limitation of reason, David Bentley Hart, a philosopher, says this: The sciences are, by their very nature, commendably fragmentary. Not only can they not provide knowledge of everything, they cannot provide complete knowledge of anything. They can yield only knowledge of certain aspects of things as seen from one very powerful but inflexibly constricted perspective. If they attempt to go beyond their methodological commissions, they cease to be sciences and immediately become fatuous occultisms. This is from his book, The Experience of God. The first half of the book is a very good statement on the limitations of science and a critique of scientism itself, the wrong view of science, the ideological view of science. So both philosophy and science keep their integrity when they do not exceed appropriate limits and seek to police the questions worth examining. Humility and self-restraint is called for here, as John Lennox says in his book, The God's Undertaker. So the next few slides, the next 2 or 3 slides, really talk about the problem or the question of naturalism or philosophical materialism. This is the closed time, space, energy, matter, naturalism question. And I have a few quotes here. One from Martin Luther King Jr. Science keeps religion from sinking into the valley of crippling irrationalism and paralyzing obscurantism. Religion prevents science from falling into the marsh of obsolete materialism and moral nihilism. And obviously, we're all concerned about the violence committed in the name of religion or the name of God, as is Jonathan Sacks in one of his recent books. Albert Einstein himself, a great violinist and physicist, said it would be possible to describe everything scientifically, but it would make no sense. It would be without meaning if you described a Beethoven symphony as a variation of wave pressure. And another super educator from Wilfrid Laurier University, John H. Redekop, a Canadian political scientist, says this: Christian spokespersons perform a praiseworthy role when they insist that there must be openness to supernatural sources of knowledge, and that a particular methodology ought not to delineate the limits of reality. Christians argue with credibility, I suggest, that a healthy, heuristically productive skepticism, which lies at the heart of science, must also be applied to scientism, the belief that science explains everything important. I would also recommend that you look at the blog by Dr. Richard Johns on materialism and creativity in the ubcgcu.org series. And there's the link. He did a particularly precise and brilliant perspective on the problem of materialism for human creativity. This leads us to the question that Charles Taylor often talks about, called the myth of the secular. There is a CBC series of this title where it talks about a lot of scholarship related to Charles Taylor's thinking on the book, The Asecular Age. So I'm particularly focusing on chapter 15 of that book, The Immanent Frame. Charles Taylor exposes the contemporary idea of secularity too, that takes science as a replacement for religion by means of a subtraction thesis. That is, the more science explains, the less we need religion. From within this ethos, it just seems obvious to many that the order of the argument proceeds from science to atheism, that modernization brings secularization. But this is not the case, says Taylor. He shows that the world we inhabit is one of many spiritual paths, or what he calls the Nova effect. It's full of religious pursuit. And here's a quote: the actual reality of Western culture is closer to the truth than a whole gamut of positions, from the most militant atheism to the most orthodox traditional theism, passing through every possible position on the way, are represented and defended somewhere in our society. So that's the pluralism of contemporary society. And it is very true of the millennial generation that they see themselves as spiritual, but not religious. questioning many times the formal religion of today, but definitely seeking spiritual wholeness. Furthermore, under this myth of the secular, we have to say that the concept of God itself, of God himself, is often faulty. The most pervasive error one encounters is the habit of conceiving God simply as some very large object or agency within the universe. Or perhaps such a God exists alongside the universe, a being among other beings. The divine, well, what you would call a demiurge. The divine is one who differs from all others in power. But in fact, beliefs regarding God concern the source and ground and end of all reality, the unity and existence of everything, the possibility of anything. God is the ground of being itself. The myth of the secular has an impact on human flourishing. It's not based on scientific facts, despite that it takes some of its inspiration from the epistemological success of science. There's a heavy focus on human goods, on human flourishing, things like rights, welfare, equality, and democracy. It is rather a moral stance called exclusive humanism. Here's a quote from Taylor. We can come to see the growth of civilization or modernity as synonymous with the laying out of a closed immanent frame. Within this, civilized values develop, and a single-minded focus on the human good, aided by fuller and fuller use of scientific reason, permits the greatest flourishing possible of human beings. Religion not only menaces these goals with its fanaticism, but it also undercuts reason, which comes to be seen as rigorously requiring scientific materialism. This captures the issue we're talking about in a nutshell. Today, our culture, in a sense, really pulls us in both directions, both secular and religious. See the dilemma play out in famous writers like Blake, Goethe, Dostoevsky, or Milotz. The contention for belief is ongoing and never definitely won or lost in the West. So one more slide on this question of explanatory problems associated with the closed world system. Leading American philosopher Alvin Plantinga argues that materialistic naturalism runs into conflict with evolutionary science, a contemporary pillar of science. The argument centers on the status of our cognitive faculties, those faculties, powers, or processes that produce beliefs or knowledge in us. Things like perception, memory, a priori intuition, introspection, testimony, induction. His argument concerns the question of the very reliability of our cognitive faculties. Can we get to true belief, reliable knowledge based on scientific materialism or philosophical naturalism? This is from his book, chapter 10 of Where the Conflict Really Lies. We studied this book in our graduate student fellowship a number of years ago and found it really quite exciting. Secondly, from Thomas Nagel, an atheist, but also concerned about this question of materialism, as a full explanation, he says the existence of consciousness is both one of the most familiar and one of the most astounding things about the world. No conception of natural order that does not reveal it as something to be expected can aspire even to the outline of completeness. And if physical science, whatever it may have to say about the origin of life, leaves us necessarily in the dark about consciousness, that shows that it cannot provide the basic form of intelligibility for this world. It's from his book, Mind and Cosmos. So reductive materialism, although hegemonic in the academy, is riddled with major philosophical problems. One can study constitutive components such as physics and chemistry of a larger reality, such as biological life, but this is never a fulsome explanation. The real danger is that methodological reduction morphs into ontological reductionism, the nothing but outlook. This is a danger dangerous move because it restricts the capacity of the mind, the breadth of the investigation itself, and it denies the full context of our study and its mental biological dimensions, that is, human meaning. So says Charles Taylor in The Language Animal. Well, here we are at part 2, towards a richer, more holistic perspective on human rationality. And this is where we think we can build a peaceful relationship between faith and reason. Love as a key to epistemology. So we're going back to D. Stephen Long and some of his insights on faith and reason. Here's a quote. For the later Wittgenstein, truth is not a matter of detachment, but engagement, the kind of engagement that love entails, and that requires judgments based on qualitative contrasts. Wittgenstein's appeal to love depends on something more akin to virtue epistemology. Love not opposed to truth. Love is not opposed to truth. They are both necessary virtues for knowledge. You cannot know what you do not love, and you cannot love what you do not know. So if we compare the early and the late Wittgenstein, the early Wittgenstein was pretty much an analytical philosopher, but he went through a conversion in his middle years and opened up his epistemology to a much richer, much broader framework. Here's another quote from Stephen Long. Only on the basis of the ontology of love can gift be understood, because love and not pure reason is the basic structure of being. The failure of human reason to achieve infinite desires is not negative, but positive. Thus, we do not need to negate reason in order to believe, but rather to supplement and intensify it. We receive knowledge as a gift. Gift, another name for the Holy Spirit, is the fullness of being, the perfection that surrounds us with an inevitable desire for truth, goodness, and beauty. It illuminates our lives. Nowadays, we often talk about emotional intelligence, that we need more than mere logic, mere rationality. But it can be a form of rationality in itself, a kind of intelligence. Next, we move to this idea of wisdom. And one of our speakers a few years ago was Tom McLeish, who wrote this book, Faith and Wisdom in Science. He's arguing that both science at its best and its long history and theology pursue wisdom. Fear of wisdom, fear of the Lord is the arche of wisdom. That's a quote from Proverbs 9:10. Tom, in his book, says that both science and theology are built on faith. Both are more about the imagination and creative questions than about method, logic, and providing answers. Science, which he calls natural philosophy, what it was called in the ancient times, from its roots is the love of wisdom about natural things, moving from ignorance to understanding. It is also significantly about reconciliation between human beings and the world. See also his most recent publication, The Poetry and Music of Science, where he talks about science and the humanities, science and the arts. And a quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel, who I really enjoy, about wonder. Wonder, or awe rather than doubt, is the root of all knowledge. Our goal should be to live life in radical amazement. Get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life casually. To be spiritual is to be amazed. And I think many scientists would say that when they come to their bench in the morning, they feel a sense of awe in their study. Let's talk about this concept, the medieval transcendentals, truth, beauty, goodness, and unity. I think these can help us recover a healthy framework on human rationality. Philosophy should be the love of wisdom that prompts people to use reason in the quest of truth, beauty, unity, and goodness. Modern rationalism, unfortunately and ironically, makes us choose truth against beauty, unity, and goodness. So, what is a richer understanding of truth? I think it includes ethics. If we recognize that truth is a way rather than a set of propositions attached to a reality or cohering with other propositions, then we might privilege those voices that embody this way, the way found in Christ's life: forgiveness, reconciliation, hospitality to strangers, as truth because it is the divine way and is universal. Because of Christianity's dogma, the virtues of liberality and generosity must be extended to all. The task of the church then is not to rule, but to make the truth present in the world. Again, from Stephen Long, the good characterizes a public, successful performance of truth. It refuses fideism. Truth is an activity, a judgment inextricably linked to the good, and therefore to moral transformation. When I am pursuing truth, I am pursuing goodness. The truth is both an underlying fidelity and love, and at the same time a generosity towards others. By refusing to subordinate itself to power, understood as willful self-assertion, truth best serves the tradition of democracy. These are wise words for today, especially. So what we're saying in this richer understanding of the relationship between faith and reason, the reconciled understanding, is that scientific knowledge needs God. We have to move beyond scientism, the strictures or restrictions of the mind in scientism. We are not postulating a God of the gaps, a God merely to explain the things that science has not yet explained. This is an old, tired caricature. We are postulating a God to explain why science explains. We do not deny that science explains what, but we postulate God to explain why science explains. The very success of science, which shows us how deeply ordered the natural world is, also provides strong grounds for believing that there is an even deeper cause for that order, a primary cause. Thus, science needs God at a fundamental and essential level. See also my blog on Paul Davies on faith and science. Richard Swinburne, a prominent Oxford philosopher, puts it this way: the issue here is that because God is not an alternative to science as an explanation, he is not a God of the gaps. On the contrary, he is the ground of all explanation. It is his existence which gives rise to the very possibility of explanation, scientific and otherwise. Furthermore, we want to say that faith is fully operative inside the scientific enterprise. And we appeal to Michael Polanyi, one of the great minds of the 20th century, great scientific and philosophical minds, and one whose most lucid critiques of scientism and logical positivism have been very helpful. He's saying that this ideology of scientism operates like a background program running in the mind. Polanyi shows brilliantly that science is not pure objectivism or mere empiricism, but it's an invested personal knowledge rooted in mentoring and passing on of skill. Science has its own good faith-based system. A breakthrough discovery, our new theory, is presented to fellow scientists, a community in good faith, with universal intent, with a belief in its veracity. It's open to peer review. Faith is operative, therefore, at all levels of research, experimentation, and discovery. Then he says that all science is both theory and value laden. This is in his Gifford lecture series that's written up in Personal Knowledge, his tome Personal Knowledge. It is personal knowledge held passionately by persons. Without a code of virtues or ethics, science could not be considered reliable and stable knowledge. I point you to my video, Late Modernity Scientism and the Quest for Meaning, for a little more detail on this subject of scientism. And there's also a blog on Michael Polanyi, a blog post on that, if you want to go into that in more detail. So what is the progressive road to integration? Fides et ratio as reconciled friends. How can we get together on the road to move from ignorance to understanding? I think they are, at their best, really good friends and cooperative colleagues. Because God is Lord of the universe, at the deepest level, there is no secular learning for Christians. There is no secular subject matter. The only secular learning is the effort of some scholars and some students to deny the relevance and existence of God. Second, there is no area of human existence or history which lies outside the realm of Christian inquiry. Third, the church has much to offer the university because it challenges the university to acknowledge the historic and continuing contributions of Christianity and to establish inclusive curricula. That's similar to the argument of Jens Zimmerman at the beginning of this presentation. Fourth, the university has much to offer the Christian because it helps to develop critical thinking, to enlarge understanding of options and assumptions, to improve learning skills, and to approach intellectual pursuits systematically and efficiently. For more mature insights on this, you could look up John W. O'Malley, Four Cultures of the West, or George Marsden, The Outrageous Idea of Christian Scholarship. Here's a quote from J.P. Moreland. In Scripture, faith involves placing trust in what you have reason to believe is true. Faith is not blind, irrational leap in the dark. Faith and reason cooperate on a biblical view of faith. They are not intrinsically hostile. He's a Christian philosopher. This is the whole premise of the burgeoning field of apologetics, examining and defending Christian convictions, facing the tough questions from various fronts. And I have a bibliography on that in my in the UBC GCU blog. Alpha is a course that can be taken by people locally, and it's a way of asking their tough questions. And I finished this slide with a quote from Flannery O'Connor, who once said to her class this encouragement: faith is more valuable, more mysterious, altogether more immense than anything you can learn or decide upon in college. Learn what you can, but also cultivate Christian skepticism. It will keep you free, not free to do anything you please, but free to be formed by something larger than your own intellect or the intellect of those around you. So church and university, a faith and reason partnership. This is our proposal. At the same time, the church reminds the university that the two have a joint task: the preservation and accumulation of knowledge and the transmission of a common heritage. Both institutions need to rethink the past, question the present, anticipate the future. Revision of human understanding. Both need to acknowledge that if they are faithful to their purpose, both will frequently find themselves in tension with society, in part for the same reasons: dissatisfaction with the status quo, challenging injustices, and raising controversial questions. Such commonality is to be expected given that both institutions emphasize the mind and both search for new insights. When the university acknowledges the limitations of the scientific method and the church concedes that it cannot possibly find scientific answers for all its convictions, the two endeavors will increasingly complement. A good example of this church and university faith and reason partnership is seen in Alistair McGrath's book, A Fine-Tuned Universe, The Search for Truth in Science and Theology. This quote comes from John Redekop, a Canadian political scientist who takes both church and university quite seriously. I would have to say he's a superior educator from Wilfrid Laurier University and Trinity Western University. I know him personally, and he's been quite a mentor to me over the years, quite a strong advocate of this faith and reason dialogue. The university's challenge to Christians and vice versa. On the other hand, the university has the right to expect Christianity and the institutions defending and promoting it to be open to new questions, new answers, and new methods in developing critical skills. It is a right, even a duty, to challenge Christians when they indulge in unreasoned credulity. This is not acceptable. The church, for its part, has a right to expect the university to stop privatizing and marginalizing Christianity and belief in God. It is arguably the most consequential social movement in history. So says Larry Siedentop in Inventing the Individual and Tom Holland in his book, Dominion. The socio-religious movement transforms the Greco-Roman world, keeping learning alive in the Dark Ages, and has produced many of the world's great artists, musicians, philosophers, and scientists. In fact, it gave rise to the university itself in the Middle Ages. So we want to look at this question more detail. See Charles Malik, Christian Critique of the University, or G. Madisi, Roots of the Modern University. So what's our conclusion? Our conclusion is that good faith integrated with good reason, or good reason integrated with good faith, offers needed mutual benefits. Scholars and scientists work with grammar, figures of speech, assumptions, dispositions, theories, bench research, and a whole variety of linguistic practice. Charles Taylor identifies the complementary nature of both denotative and constitutive linguistic capacity, both the study of science and the study of human meaning. We ought to explore and enjoy these language and logic skills to the full, use them for the common good of society, promote reconciliation between faith and reason. We give thanks to God for offering us mere mortals access to this high level of calling. The university is a rich, stimulating community of amazing international interlocutors, but we also find a voice and our full identity within a robust philosophical anthropology, within the incarnational word made flesh, the word that underwrites all human language and speak, Jesus the Christ. The road to integration provides us with motivational energy in our work. It can also free us from the grip of hubris and a myopic perspective on our research and self-understanding. Here are some of the resources I've collected for you on inspiring the engagement and the interface between faith and reason, reason and faith. Top 10 Christian voices in science and faith from the Veritas Forum. Prominent names in philosophy who are identified as Christians. Prominent names in science and philosophy of science who are self-identified Christians. And free lectures on faith and academic issues from our GFCF website. So take a look at these and follow up on some of those inspiring people. As I said, we've worked over 30 years on this question of faith and reason in the sciences, humanities, the social sciences, and the arts. I've collected a small bibliography on faith and reason, which I think will be very helpful to you, which includes this concept of incarnational understanding and worldview frameworks. James Sire's book, Habits of the Mind, Intellectual Life as a Christian Calling, very helpful. I mentioned some of these other books. Just one at the bottom there that I haven't talked about, Sir John Polkinghorn. He was one of our first speakers in the Forum series. His book, One World, The Interaction of Science and Theology. I would have to say he has been an anchor, an inspiration, and a juggernaut in the faith and science discussion. He's recently deceased, but he's left a tremendous legacy, and this is one of his key books. So thanks for listening. The question we were addressing over the course of this discussion is, first of all, can we understand what faith is and what reason is? Can we understand how they come together? Can we make peace between faith and reason? And we are saying, I believe, we can indeed engage this urgent task, and I think it's our responsibility to do that, to build the bridges from both sides of faith and reason. Thank you very much.